Hello and a very warm welcome to Sunday Test.
Okay, let's jump right in. So, after the huge Mauryan Empire broke apart around the 2nd century BCE, you might think there was just a void. But that's not what happened at all. In fact, it was the complete opposite. It actually kicked off one of the most exciting and dynamic periods in all of Indian art history. All across the subcontinent, you had new rulers, new kingdoms, and that meant a flood of new ideas. Art just started to explode in all these incredible and diverse ways.
So, here's what we've got lined up. We'll start with what this new era was all about. Then, we'll look at how the stupa totally transformed. After that, we get to a huge moment, giving Buddha a face for the first time. We'll also explore the amazing cave tradition, literally carving into mountains. And we'll finish up with some quick facts to make sure everything sticks.
All right, so let's set the scene. Imagine this massive single empire just collapses. What happened in the power vacuum, right? Well, in post-Mauryan India, it meant the rise of all these powerful regional kingdoms, and you can bet each one of them was eager to make its own unique mark on the world. So, starting around the 2nd century BCE, you've got dynasties like the Shungas up north and the Satavahanas in the Deccan. These guys became huge patrons of the arts. Then, by the 1st century CE, the Kushanas show up, and they are a major force. They controlled these critical trade routes, which meant they were at the center of this amazing mix of cultures. You can see how this whole political scene was basically the perfect breeding ground for brand new schools of art to just pop up and flourish.
And this is the really crucial thing to get. That political breakup, it was the direct trigger for an artistic revolution. I mean, it was an explosion of creativity. Instead of having just one single imperial style dictated from the top, you suddenly have all these vibrant regional styles bubbling up at the same time. Think Barhut, Sanchi, Mathura, Gandhara, all happening at once. It's incredible.
Okay, so where do we see this new energy? Let's look at one of the most iconic structures from this period, the stupa. Now, these started out as pretty simple mounds, right? Just built to house relics. But during this time, they transformed into these magnificent, elaborate storybooks carved right into the stone.
But before we dig in, let's do a super quick refresher on what a stupa actually is. You've got the main dome, that's the anda, which is built over sacred relics. Then there's a path for walking around it, the pradakshinapatta, and the bits on top, the harmika and chatri. The whole idea was for people to walk around it, kind of absorbing the stories that were carved all over the railings and gateways. And you can see this evolution so clearly. It's like watching art grow up in real time. You can trace this perfect line of development through 3 major sites. You start with the early, kind of flat carvings at Barhut, then you move to the much deeper, more detailed stories at Sanchi, and you end up at Amaravati with these unbelievably dynamic and fluid sculptures. It's just a beautiful progression.
So let's start at Barhut. This is really the beginning of this whole narrative art thing. The sculptures are in what's called low relief, which basically just means they don't stick out very far from the stone background. The style is very linear, almost like a drawing on stone. And yeah, the figures can look a little stiff. The stories are told in a pretty straightforward way, usually with just a few key characters.
But then you get to Sanchi and wow, the leap forward is just incredible. Suddenly, the carvings are in high relief, so they really pop out, creating all this depth and drama. The figures look so much more natural. They're moving, they're interacting. The artists packed every inch with detail, telling these complex stories from the Buddha's life and his past lives, known as the Jatakas. But here's the interesting part. Even with all this detail, the Buddha himself is never actually shown as a person. He's always represented by symbols, like an empty throne or a set of footprints.
And that brings us to a huge, huge shift. That whole idea of only using symbols, well, that was about to change in a big way, because this period sees what is maybe the single most important development in all of Buddhist art. For the very first time, artists decided to give the Buddha an actual human face. And this groundbreaking idea really took off in 2 major artistic hubs. And what's so fascinating is that you get 2 totally different ideas of what the Buddha should look like popping up at roughly the same time. First, you have the Mathura school. They used this local spotted red sandstone, and their inspiration was purely indigenous. They looked at older statues of yakshas. So their Buddha is strong, with a round, smiling face and a really fleshy, powerful body. But then, way over in Gandhara, that's in modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, the artists were looking at Greek and Roman art. That Hellenistic influence is super clear. Their Buddha, carved from gray sandstone, has wavy hair, clothes that drape realistically, and this very calm, meditative expression. almost like a Greek god, like Apollo.
And this wasn't just a small change. This innovation, the very idea of creating a human image for someone seen as divine, it really took off from the 1st century CE. And it was a total game changer. It completely transformed Buddhist art and how people practiced their faith. For the first time, followers had a direct, personal image they could actually connect with.
Okay, so while all this sculpting was happening out in the plains, something else, something just as monumental, was going on in the hills of Western India. I'm talking about a tradition where people were carving entire monasteries, not building them, but carving them, straight out of the solid rock of mountainsides. It's just mind-boggling. So in these amazing rock-cut sites, you generally find two types of structures. The first one is the Chaitya Hall. The easiest way to think of it is as the main prayer hall, kind of like a church. It's usually a long hall, sometimes with a curved roof and pillars, and at the far end, there's a stupa, also carved from the rock, which was the focus of worship. And the second type of structure is the vihara. This was the monastery proper, basically the living quarters for the monks. It was usually designed as a central hall with a bunch of small, simple rooms or cells carved into the sides, where the monks would sleep and meditate. The sheer scale of this work is just immense. It's a testament to unbelievable engineering skill and, of course, deep devotion. You can see these incredible complexes at places like Ajanta, which is world famous for the stunning paintings that still survive inside, bringing the caves to life. Then there's Ellore, which is so special because it's a home for everyone. You've got Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain caves carved right next to each other. And you have to mention Karla, which has the absolute largest, most magnificent rock-cut Chaitya hall in the entire country. Just spectacular.
Okay, wow, we have covered a ton of ground. So before we wrap up, let's do a really quick rundown of the key features just to pull it all together and make sure it sticks. This is a great way to remember the core identity of each style. So if you think Sanchi, think high relief carvings and that symbolic Buddha. For Gandhara, the keywords are Hellenistic influence and that calm, meditative look. Mathura, that's the indigenous Yaksha-inspired style, smiling face, bold and fleshy. And finally, Amaravati is all about that incredible sense of movement, with those dynamic, slender figures.
And one last really important point. While Buddhist art was having this golden age, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. You have to remember, this period also saw the rise of the main Brahmanical sects. So art connected to Vaishnavism and Shaivism was also being made, especially in places like Mathura. It was all part of this incredibly rich and diverse cultural tapestry. So I'll leave you with a question to think about. Out of everything we've seen, which artistic leap was more impactful? Was it the development of these complex narrative panels on the stupas, telling stories in stone? Or was it that revolutionary moment when artists finally gave the Buddha a human form? It really makes you think about what the true purpose of religious art is, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. Now, if you want to test your knowledge and make sure you've got all this down, head on over to our website, www.sundaytest.com. We'll see you in the next one.